When a young boy finishes Berserk, he's left sad. He doesn't know what to do with himself. We cut away from Griffith for discernibly no reason, and we are now on hiatus. The young boy dwells in sadness for a little while, only to search the internet for recommendations. It turns out that he isn't alone, and many people go through this post-Berserk syndrome. In his seconds of research, he notices two titles that people recommend constantly for others that are suffering from post-Berserk syndrome: Vagabond and Vinland Saga. And since I haven't read anything more than half of a chapter of Vagabond, we're going to talk today about how Vinland Saga lends itself into this comparison and why it's largely unfair that it's ubiquitously compared to Berserk. Vinland Saga seems to live in Berserk's shadow, at least in the manga world. The anime for Vinland Saga is set to come out in a few weeks as of this recording, and I think it could blow Berserk out of the water in terms of popularity in the anime sphere. But as it stands now, Vinland Saga is known as the manga you read when you run out of Berserk material, and that's not fair. There seem to be 5 key characteristics that connect the two series: the medieval setting, the graphic representation of war, early structural similarities, the protagonists, Guts and Thorfinn, as well as the antagonists, Canute and Griffith. These comparisons all only really apply to early Vinland Saga, as the series changes drastically moving forward into its second arc. The ubiquity of the connection between these two series seems to date back to the pre-farm era of Vinland Saga anyway. The first connector is the medieval setting, and this comparison is completely justifiable. Unlike the rest of the things on this key characteristics list, this one actually fits. They are two very different types of medieval warfare, with Berserk focusing on knights and more English aspects, while Vinland Saga focuses on Nordic aspects and obviously Vikings. Besides that, the only real difference is that Vinland Saga is set in our world, in England and Denmark and Iceland, whereas Berserk is set on a fictional planet and in a fictional world that's been purposely kept undefined. So the first compare actually checks out. Now let's talk about their similar representations of war. Berserk is by no means a pro-war story, but there are undeniably some moments of wartime glorification in Berserk. Some people may argue that any representation of war, no matter how horrifically depicted, is in some way a pro-war message. But if we just talk in layman's terms, Berserk has used war to glorify certain things. Griffith's success is derived from his leadership in war, and Guts has some undeniably cool feats in war that unintentionally makes it look appealing. Miru's intention is in no way to portray war as a beautiful thing, but Berserk doesn't go as far as Vinland Saga in its anti-war representation. Vinland Saga is far more judgmental when it comes to war. Thorfinn and Askeladd are never fighting in self-defense. Even in the Thorkel situation, that was something they got themselves into by striking unnecessarily first. In Berserk, certain fights are justifiable due to the circumstances Miru has created, whereas in Vinland Saga, getting into a fight that isn't in self-defense is always portrayed as a bad thing. Guts was put into a position with Gambino where him fighting and killing him was completely justifiable. He deserved it. The conquering of Doldry is seen as a positive thing by all characters. There's no stopping and mourning over all the dead enemy soldiers in Berserk. Afterwards, Griffith just kills Ganon, and Guts and Casca have a tender moment. No mind to these dead soldiers. In Vinland Saga, the very general that Thorfinn kills in the first chapter doesn't deserve to die. The village that Askeladd's band murders doesn't deserve to die. The messenger dude that Askeladd decapitates doesn't deserve to die, and Harald's family of good-natured, surprisingly progressive people didn't deserve to die. And every time this happens, we are positioned to see the horrors of what our characters have done. In the prologue, we understand that Askeladd and Thorfinn are deeply immoral, terrible human beings because we see things from the other side. We feel the weight of these unnecessary deaths, when in Berserk sometimes death is played off as a joke. Again, this is a difference in the two series, not necessarily a value comparison. It's just me pointing out that under the surface they are fundamentally different. This difference comes from Vinland Saga's core theme of pacifism. This is the key differentiator that Vinland Saga has from Berserk. Miru's message is not pacifism, and the themes of Berserk are far too complex to get into here, but Vinland Saga is that simple. Fighting unless in self-defense is never justifiable, and even then it's immoral to kill someone. Berserk is so different in this regard. Guts never tries to challenge his enemies with reason. Sometimes, like in Farnese's case, he brings them to reason, but not intentionally. Guts inspires hope in his comrades, but not through pacifism. That's just not what Berserk is about. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a difference that people need to understand. The core binding element isn't true. Vinland Saga is pulling you in with these same trappings, only to subvert them. The climax of the second arc of Vinland Saga is Thorfinn allowing himself to get punched in the face repeatedly. Guts would never do something like that. People expecting anything like Berserk are going to be sorely disappointed past the first 50 chapters, but Vinland Saga is so good at hooking you that it'll take you down this drastically different road, shove its message in your face, and you won't even have noticed. That was always its goal, dangle Berserk in your face and then change the message midway through the series and somehow write a second, better arc about farming and slavery. It's brilliant. Berserk seems to expect the audience to understand that war is brutal, but it obviously has some power fantasy trappings, especially towards the beginning. Vinland Saga also has power fantasy trappings towards the beginnings, but if you read between the lines, and especially upon rereads, you'll understand that it had been teasing the pacifism theme from the beginning, with Thor's talking about being a true warrior. Berserk expects you to understand that war is brutal and uses it as a setting to tell other thematically relevant stories, while Vinland Saga chooses to make you understand instead. These are two very different takes on war, and since this is the most glaring connector of the two series, I think it's harmful for Vinland Saga to get Berserk refugees who have been told that they are the same. It's clear that Vinland Saga and Yukimura were heavily inspired by Miura and Berserk, and that has led to similarities in the works that lead to these comparisons. Both start off with single missions that introduce our protagonist at the current time before flashing back to prologues that encompass the first great arcs of both series. The prologues both lead to massive events in the protagonist's life that changes them eternally and makes them shift their focus. What they lived for is taken from both of them. Further than this, Thorfinn has begun to build a travelling party that draws many parallels to Guts' travelling party. But besides this, the structure diverts immediately after the conclusion of the prologue, where it seems most of these comparisons start to fall apart. Guts has his grand self-awakening in a single night when he returns to Godo's hut, when he spends the night thinking in the protective cave and realizes that he's been fucking up and that all that truly matters to him at this point was Karska. The farm arc is that concept of self-reflection and awakening drawn out over one masterful 50-plus chapter arc, and honestly, I prefer it in Vinland Saga. In Berserk, it was important for Guts to figure it out quickly because Karska was missing and he had reason to believe she was in danger. Guts doesn't have downtime, unlike Thorfinn, who can sit around on a farm for a year discovering what it means to be a true warrior, because the world outside isn't crawling with demons and raping bands of trolls. So again, this isn't a critique of Berserk, it's just me pointing out the fundamental difference the series have and how it's unfair for Vinland Saga to live in the shadow of Berserk when they are so extremely different. Everything following the farm arc is completely dissimilar to Berserk because the pacifism train is fully rolling at this point, and we already went over how that differentiates these two manga. Now let's talk about the final 2 points on the checklist, the protagonist and antagonists, and their parallels, or lack thereof, to each other. Guts and Thorfinn have more similarities story-wise, while Canute and Griffith have more similarities aesthetically. Thorfinn and Guts both have traumatic backstories relating to their father's deaths, and both find themselves under the command of more tactful individuals. They are both exceptional fighters in their worlds and are thrown into battle at tender ages. They both hold much rage inside them, and this aspect of Thorfinn's character is more comparable to Black Swordsman Guts than Golden Age Guts. Their contemporary iterations are also quite similar. Both are stoic, unknowing leaders. They both don't necessarily want the burdens of leadership, and they both have goals that drive them forward through all the past and present trauma, even though Guts seems to have recently achieved his goal, while Thorfinn still seems to be way off. Guts and Thorfinn have their similarities, but I wouldn't consider Thorfinn to be a Guts ripoff. Their characters have gone in considerably different directions as we have gone over already. Even in their more comparable forms aesthetically, they are so different. Guts is a mammoth of muscle and human perfection with a massive sword, while Thorfinn is small and quick and uses small knives and precision attacks. I think Yukimura did this intentionally, knowing he was going to get comparisons with the characters, so he intentionally made them opposites in terms of combat type. So they have their similarities, but I wouldn't recommend Thorfinn as a character to people who want Guts 2.0. Thorfinn has gone through his share of atrocity, but it's incomparable to Guts, and Guts is far more interesting, so comparing the two characters would only harm Vinland Saga. Yukimura knew exactly what he was doing when he created the character design for Canute. He wants you to think about Griffith. Make that connection, then watch as it doesn't happen. Visually, this might be the most direct connection between both series. With Canute as a character, Yukimura is playing with the Berserk readers that have migrated over to Vinland Saga. He knows what they expect and he's here to subvert them. Canute and Griffith, as it turns out, are completely different, even though it seems Canute is set up to be Thorfinn's Griffith. Thorfinn and Canute do eventually become rivals, but Canute never betrays Thorfinn, he actually helps him, and Thorfinn's main motivation is Vinland, not Canute. Yukimura was suspecting a crossover of fans and prepared for it, and then manipulated them in the best way possible. This is an interesting subtext to put into your story, to play with a subset of your audience that you know is crossover from something similar, and then to manipulate them because of that very similarity. It's genius. This is the only interesting thing about My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia Academia is far more fun as a Naruto viewer because it plays with the exact same concepts and poses questions through its commonalities with Naruto. Bakugo and Sasuke immediately come to mind as a mirror example of what's done here with Canute and Griffith. My Hero Academia and Naruto obviously have a crossover fanbase, and My Hero Academia clearly draws heavy inspiration from Naruto, and the author of My Hero Academia knows this. So he teases Bakugo's turn to villainy in nearly the exact same way that Naruto does with Sasuke's turn to Orochimaru, only to pull a role reversal in the final stretch by having Bakugo double down on the side of heroism. This entire arc is far more engaging and rewarding if you're a Naruto fan, and this same principle applies to Berserk and Vinland Saga and Canute and Griffith. They look the same, and then Yukimura starts teasing Canute going down the same treacherous and ambitious path, only for in Thorfinn's moment of weakness for him to cover for him and allow him to run away unharmed. He's basically leaning on the viewer, reminding them what happened last time to increase tension. And Canute's rejection of this and forgiving of Thorfinn is only made more rewarding through the viewer's previous experience with Griffith and Berserk. Instead of building to a climax where Canute betrays everyone, including Thorfinn, the climax of the arc comes out of nowhere when suddenly Askeladd becomes somehow even more of a forward-thinking god. When it turns out to be Askeladd's death that breaks Thorfinn forever as a character, it is a masterful subversion. If you'd been paying attention up until this point, you probably would have realised that Thorfinn likely wasn't going to get his revenge on Askeladd, and let's be honest, if you're 50 chapters in, you like Askeladd way more than you like Thorfinn, and you don't even want to see Thorfinn get his revenge. The Griffith expectations are subverted brilliantly, and to me this represents Vinland Saga shedding the Berserk skin and stepping out of Berserk's shadow forever. From then on, everything about the two series are different. There is no farm arc equivalent in Berserk, and the Baltic Sea War is a beast upon itself. Guts is never challenged to restrain himself through his personal moral code. He has behemoths to fight and Shirokei to keep him safe. They inhabit incredibly different worlds and readjust themselves appropriately. Vinland Saga quadrupling down on its pacifistic messaging also helps it differentiate itself from Berserk, and thus comparing them in this way seems unfair. Ultimately, it seems Vinland Saga and Berserk have only been grouped together by idiots who noticed the most obvious surface-level parallels between the two, misunderstood them, and then confused them for the same thing, seeking to put Vinland Saga in a familiar box, when if they had paid any attention, or stuck with either, they would have realised how drastically different both of these wartime epics are. Support links in the description below. Thanks.